Hey everyone, welcome to another week of ProMAX Tech Talks. I'm Matt in the living room laboratory, and I have my tech team on the line. And today we're going to be talking about the big elephant in the room, which is working from home during the COVID pandemic. So guys, before we dive into the deep stuff, what are you guys missing about working in your office? Like, what have you had to adjust to work remotely? Nathaniel, you want to kick this off?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've got little kids, so having a space where I can get away from the little kids is not something I deal with at the office. But it's interesting. So, like, I'm working from inside of my garage, and just my mental space of working in here because it's a garage. There's no windows or anything in it. Is just not really conducive to the same drive that I have when I'm at our office.
Mike, how about you?
Um, I'm a little bit mixed because like I can concentrate a little bit more in the office. Unfortunately, I have parents that don't really speak English, so I have to translate everything for them from day to day. And then like little things that pop up just randomly all day. So I kind of miss working in the office, but I'm kind of used to working remotely. So
Taylor, how about you?
Trying to find things to do when I'm working from home because my job kind of revolves around being there and building things.
Always
So
something to do. I can always make sure we're good on
yeah, don't worry. I find stuff to do. It's just kind of like there is that moment when I wake up and I'm like, I'm not building a server today. I'm just gonna
Sometimes
enter
it's not.
emails.
Sometimes it's not. It's not easy to. Sometimes just knowing what comes next is a lot harder at home.
Yeah,
It's kind of odd, but yeah.
that's a good way to put it.
How about you, Brian?
Stop vibrating.
Well, you already work from home, so this isn't really that big of a deal for you.
Well, that's not true at all.
It's different. It's different.
Yeah, no. So yeah, I've worked from home for 2 years now, and the big problem. I said this before. The issue right now is my kids are home. Like my wife and I both work from home, but our kids are in daycare. When we're not, because there's just no way you can with a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old that you could function, as a working adult in one place. So yeah, it's just trying to like find the ebb and flow of hanging with my kids and making sure that both my wife and I can get reasonable work done. It's tough. It's hard.
Absolutely. For me, the biggest thing was turning my office where like I can shut the door and record videos and just kind of just throw stuff out there. And now I have to do that in the corner of my living room. Like I literally converted a corner into what you see here. And then dealing with like people coming and going. So obviously I can't just shut it off to the world. So that's awesome. We're going to get through this. And so now let's dive into the deep stuff. How are we seeing our customers using this? How are video professionals adjusting to working remote? Nathaniel, what about you? What have you seen from people you've talked to?
Yeah, most people I've talked to have, tried a bunch of the stuff that everybody's talking about, the VPN, the proxies, this and that. And most of them that I've talked to have just kind of copied stuff to a drive, walked that drive home. And they're like, I hope this, pandemic ends before I have to start another project. And, a lot of them are worried / cognizant / annoyed by the fact that they're going to have to figure out how to kind of reconcile all of that data once they're back at their studios.
Nice. Mike, so working in support, you get a lot of the phone calls coming in. Like what are some of the questions you're getting from people who are trying to work remotely?
I get a lot of questions of users trying to access their server remotely in general. Just like a lot of questions like how can I get to my server without a VPN or anything, without the general knowledge of a VPN, or the basics of network. There's a lot of assumptions that the server is out in the wild to everyone to access, but realistically, it's very enclosed in their network, and there's a lot more setup that's involved.
Okay, cool. So Brian, what are some of the biggest challenges that we've seen with making this switch?
Yeah, I think it's the uncertainty, quite honestly, because if everybody knew that that everybody just had to work from home from here on out, I think everybody would be a lot more open to different workflows and different ways of attacking this. There's still a lot of uncertainty as to how long this is going to last, and to how long, the severity of it in general and everything. And because of that, to Nathaniel's point, a lot of people are just kind of defaulting to the last thing that worked for them, which was throw it on a hard drive and plug it in. because they know it works. And it's like, no one's entirely sure if spending the time and spending the money to like burn out this entirely new way of working is worth it yet. And it's a giant unknown. And I mean, you know, as you look at stuff today, things in the US at least seem to be getting on the better track. And now we're kind of hoping that May is like a good month. And do we have to care after April? Like, you know, how far does this go? Like, so it's just the uncertainty. Like nobody's quite sure just how far to commit to this yet.
Makes sense. Nathaniel, have you seen anything out there as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the uncertainty certainly resonates. You know, some of the frustrations Mike was touching on with, you know, connecting to a server that's designed to be a high performance local server externally. I've just seen a lot of frustration. You know, people, you know, most people I've talked to have a pretty realistic expectation as far as performance goes. And we all know, like, what we work on is, you know, a small project is 500 gigs. And, you know, it's funny. I've talked to a lot of people that have seen a lot of the information out there. We've put out information our competitors have. There's a lot of great information on, like, here's the options you have. But, like, nobody's kind of saying, like, by the way, all of these options kind of suck. And they kind of do. And everybody I've talked to knows that. So, you know, Brian, to your point, like people want to get back to normal because, you know, at least in this world, there's going to be, you know, a pretty big delta between, you know, the ideal workflow we've all created over the last 10, 15 years versus how you have to do this if you're truly a remote distributed cloud-based environment, which is just there's a lot of messy parts to that I think a lot of people are frustrated that it's not as smooth as it should be, even though we all understand why.
Yeah. So I remember it's been a little bit over a month ago was when this all started. And it was this mad dash for who can get out remote workflows for their teams. And I know we were spending countless hours like diving into these and like trying to figure it out. What are some of the other solutions we've seen people present? Like which ones are good and which are just like some smoke and mirrors? Like which ones are being oversimplified? You guys want to dive into that? Brian, I know you kind of feel passionately about some of these, so I think you might be the best to kick this off.
Answer is all of them.
Yeah, no, look, to Nathaniel's point, like none of these remote workflows that are out there today are going to be like every single one of them is going to require change, and some of them significant change and significant compromise. None of them are just going to be this nice, transparent, you know, transition to work from home and then to go back and you know, and on top of that too, like, you know, some of them are kind of like one-time temporary workflows. Some of them are like, well, maybe we can do this more often kind of things. And they all just manifest differently. The overriding thing is if you want to stay connected, then it comes down to bandwidth, internet bandwidth. Like, how do you transfer footage? How do you manage footage? How do you keep things central? A lot of these solutions, you know, where they can potentially centralize things or they can potentially deal with, you know, footage management and stuff, they leave out another core element. Like, okay, now 5 people have different copies of the project, or, you know, these are proxy versions of the footage, not the full res. And now we've got to relink it and we've got to go online and do other things. Like it's really difficult because every solution creates more problems that maybe they don't have to be solved right now, but before this is all over, they're going to have to be solved. And it's going to be a lot more work for you or the rest of your team or somebody else that you're going to have to hire. It's just kind of ugly all around. There's no silver bullet here. And that's, you know, none of us have found that yet.
Yeah. Like everything I keep seeing popping up, whether it's from, you know, us or Frame.io or SNS or Avid or whomever, you know, it's all talking about like, oh, well, you just have to do these 2 things. But it's like, don't worry about that giant elephant over there. Just think about these 2 things. It's cool. Like proxy workflows, cool. Like I get it. like it's just an online offline workflow, and there's a lot of inherent complexity to relinking media and versioning and all of that stuff that, you know, yes, you can download proxies, but where are those proxies being made? Are they already made? Are they, you know, like SNS has this Nomad thing, and it's pretty cool. Like it's parsing, you know, the Premiere project file and pulling just the proxies, but it's like, where are those proxies being made? Are they already made? You know, are those, you know, H.264s or MPEGs? Like, is that really, like, does it matter to have those to edit something? And what happens when you need to go actually output a file? There's just a lot of these details that a lot of vendors are just kind of skimming over. And I think it's all from a good heart. Like, it's all vendors saying like, hey guys, like, we do local workflows, like here's how you can use our product in a remote environment. And it's from a genuine good heart from ourselves and all of our competitors that are trying to do that. The cool thing is I haven't seen anybody like really trying to like, take advantage of this moment. Like everybody's like, we want to take care of our customers. But like the reality is like when you've got when you go and do a shoot and you've got 2 terabytes of raw footage, like there's just not a great remote workflow for that.
Yeah.
Like, there's just
when you really come down to data at that size, no joke, like physically shipping that drive is faster than a data transfer across the internet in almost every case outside of like dedicated lines.
Absolutely.
And even then, in some cases,
yeah.
You know, Amazon and Backblaze and those guys have snowballs and fireballs for a reason.
Well, and Brian, to your point about adjusting around workflows, it's like, okay, if we are okay, you know, it's online content that's going to be on YouTube, and, you know, color space and bit depth doesn't matter. Like, you know, shoot on an iPhone 10 and, you know, upload it straight to the cloud. Like that's a good option, but that's a complete shift in a workflow.
Right. There's a lot of change in that. I mean, I bet you right now there's a lot of people, you know, shooting their red 5Ks thinking, man, this was not a good idea.
And it might force some of those changes. Like, do we have to shoot on our red, or can we shoot on a DSLR or with a lower bit rate? Because ultimately, if you're shooting on a red, but then you're, you know, working in H.264, sure, you can conform that at the end.
Well, you know, when you consider that though, you're going to conform it in the end, but then, you know, that's potentially got to go to color. It's got to go for audio sweetening, all this other stuff. And that data has to move between here and there every step of your workflow. Yeah. So, you know, if you've got a multi-step workflow like that, if everybody's working from home, their facilities are different, their capabilities are different, like it just gets ugly super fast.
That's, I've heard a lot of, and not to pick on them, I love their product. Like Frame.io is kind of doing the same thing from a different angle because they're like a great review and approval tool. Mm-hmm. But like a lot of the content I'm seeing from them is like, oh, just download this file. A file, that's not how production works. Like you've got a project with all these different files and different versions of the and that's not, you know, downloading individual files is just asking for the data mess and the lack of collaboration that people are trying to avoid.
Well, yeah, I think, you know, everybody in the world of storage, you know, everybody's consumed with capacity and performance are usually the key things. But, you know, historically, one of the driving things for our clients to get into shared storage that was an easy third place, and sometimes, you know, in the top 2 with most people, is the centralization and organization aspect of shared storage, getting it out of individual drives and into one place where, you know, consistent, correct backups can be done with the right data, you know, at the right times.
Well, I was listening to something, some facility owner, and he was talking about their remote workflow. They copy the data so it's in different locations, and then on a daily basis, you know, he, you know, kind of reconciles all of the differences in the project files and this. And I'm just like, wow, that's a giant, like, like a gaping problem that shouldn't be happening, because
that's a career for some people.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, here's the reality. And I don't say this because we're a shared storage company. We're a shared storage company because it's there's ways to do this that are much
Right.
better. But like, that's why everybody moved to shared storage. So you don't have to deal with reconciling all of that. You just have a central bucket that everybody's working off of. There is no reconciliation. It's all backed up. It's all kind of centralized and controlled in one spot.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you guys say like there's a lot of ways this stuff can get ugly. In a dream world, what would that ideal workflow look like? Brian, I know we've talked about this a little bit back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, look, the big ones, the big things that kind of have to be checked off. I think the thing that everybody's concerned about first and foremost is access. Like your users have to have access to the right data. More so than performance, actually. Like if you can get a file, you can slug your way through like a crap performance to do work if you have to. But if you can't access the file, you can't access the file. So data accessibility is a big one. Performance is a pretty close second because you've got to be able to work with it. And then, the next one for me is just kind of that organizational aspect, the data uniformity, like not having 5 copies of the same stuff everywhere, because, you could satisfy those first 2 by saying everybody gets their own hard drive and here's, your 5 terabyte hard drives with all the data. You're going to end up with 5 different versions of everything at that point, and reconciling that to Nathaniel's point is going to be a disaster. And if it's 2 months before all this is done, that's 2 months of random stuff. Like that's going to be horrible.
Yeah.
And then the next one there is just having, consistent, not centralized. It doesn't have to be centralized, but consistent, complete backups. The ability to go out and get the right data. That becomes a lot easier if everything's centralized, but not necessarily a requirement. Those are really the big ones for me. There's some other secondary things in there like, data redundancy and stuff for uptime, things like that just make it all the better. But those 4 points are really the big ones, accessibility, performance, uniformity, and backup, like having some kind of backup plan involved in that. If you can check those boxes in your workflow, you're in pretty good shape. That's super duper high level, and there's a lot of detail, when you get down to it in those. But those are the ones to care about. If you get those 4, you've got something of a workflow in place, and you can kind of tweak and make it more efficient from there.
All right.
The one thing I would add to that though is the ease of use side. This has been a theme in our industry for the last 20 years. Because ultimately, you've got a lot of creative users that aren't network admins that require network tools to get their job done. And making that simple is a huge task. What I've seen with so many of the remote workflows that I've heard customers talk about, that I've heard vendors talk about, that are actually happening out there, is the level of non-creative, data management tasks, data wrangling crap is astronomical compared to working in a local environment. So I think that ease of use aspect, and kind of generically, like at ProMAX, we're always talking about allow creatives to be creative.
Right.
But I think that's actually really super important.
Awesome. And before we wrap this up, Mike and Taylor, do you guys have any final thoughts on working from home?
It takes a lot of acclimation for different users or different workflows. So it's like an uphill battle. There's no end all be all workflow. So
cool. Taylor?
Yeah, one thing I'll say is that whole oversimplification of things like say that, hey, just set up a VPN. I can say from the last 2 weeks of what I've been doing, it is not just that easy. Especially if you're in an environment like say education or medical or government or corporate, where you have a security team that is, pretty locked down on making sure that, any data that is leaving the building that is secured is also secured in transit to your house. You're going to have to work with a lot of different IT people. You're going to bring in a lot of different, priorities, and what everyone has a different goal in this entire setup. And it's going to take, a significant portion of time just to get that initial VPN connection there in the first place, let alone making it usable for actual work.
Yeah, I was going to say VPNs that run at that level of security are not fast.
Well, and I will throw stones here at Avid. I saw I saw their how to remote edit from home blog. Like they clearly paid some SEO person to write this blog, and who's never edited anything in their lives as far as video goes. And it was like, step 1, connect to a VPN. Step 2, ensure you have the bandwidth you need. Step 3, edit. And I read this thing and I was like, I feel like you're glazing over a couple details.
Step 1, build a rocket. Step 2, make sure you have enough fuel. Step 3, go to the moon. Yeah.
Perfect. So what I'm hearing here is remote video editing from home. Not so easy a caveman can do it.
Definitely not.
No. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for joining us for this week. Join us next week when we talk about video production from home and how to shoot mobile footage on your phone. We're going to be bringing in one of our customers who has been put out a really good piece of content about how to do that. So join us for that. We look forward to seeing you next week. And if you haven't already, hit that red subscribe button. Take it easy, everyone.